so glad you guys could join us today. As Karen said, I'm part of the content team. So part of what I do is provide content to our retail partners, to Wilton.com, and to all of you, all of the classes that we post on the Insider site. I take part in writing some of those. And it just so happens that one of the classes that was, I think, most recently posted either this month or last month was the wrapped buttercream pattern transfer class. So I wrote that class, and I have to admit that I was very unfamiliar with that technique until just a few months ago. I had certainly done the old-fashioned pattern transfer with the piping gel that we all used to teach in course 1, but I had never seen a cake design transferred around the side of a cake until it just started popping up on social media recently. So after some research, I felt pretty comfortable giving it a try, but you know, after I wrote the class, I thought to myself, how many of you guys have never tried this? If you're not comfortable with it, you're not going to want to teach the class. But it is definitely trending. In fact, just today, Wilton posted the top trends for 2021 for cake design. And this was one of the top techniques. So hopefully when we are done here, you are going to be excited and comfortable enough to offer this to your students because it should be pretty hot this year. Okay, so for starters, I already took a 6-inch 2-layer cake and I iced it in buttercream. I just did a crumb coat on the side because we're going to be adding more buttercream to it eventually when we apply the pattern transfer. But the top, I did put my regular layer of buttercream on top and iced it smooth, so that's ready to be decorated. But again, the sides, you could just put a very light coating on it. And then you would just pop that in the refrigerator. I just find it's easier to work on a chilled cake when we apply the pattern. So for the pattern I'm doing today, I would have loved to have done the pattern that was featured in the images for the class that's posted on the site. This is the pattern that I could use. Unfortunately, we got to try to keep this to an hour today, and this would take way too long for today's demo. So I am going to do just a less detailed design. This is an animal print that I think I should be able to pound this one out a lot quicker for you, but it's basically the same concept. Where I got this pattern, I just Googled animal print, and this is one of several that came up, and it turns out this took me to the Hobby Lobby site, and this happened to be one of their scrapbook paper patterns. So I simply enlarged it, and then I printed it out on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and I cut it in half and taped it together so I've got the length that I need. Anyone looking for this pattern, I kind of did the same thing finding this one. I just Googled flower pattern background, and this was one of many that came up. If you really don't know where to find a good pattern, you know what's really great is wrapping paper, like on a roll, because it'll give you the length that you need. And there's just such beautiful wrapping paper out there. So, you know, you could always find a pattern there, or a large gift bag, wallpaper, coloring books, anything like that. You just don't want to get too detailed with the design, because when you actually wrap it on the cake, there is going to be a little bit of distortion. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay. So what we want to do first is we need to measure our cake so we can then make sure that our pattern is going to fit around the cake. So basically you want to do your height, which is pretty easy. You just take your ruler and measure it. Mine came out to 4 5/8. But then we need to get the circumference, and that gets a little trickier. So the way I did that is I'm just taking a piece of thread, but dental floss works great too. And you're just gonna wrap it around, and then you would just use your ruler to measure the length of the thread. So that ended up being 19.5 inches. So then what you want to do is you need to make sure that your pattern is at least that tall as your cake and the length of the circumference. But you're going to want to add a little extra to the length, because this is going to have buttercream on it. So it's going to end up being thicker, which is going to expand the circumference of your cake. So I would give yourself an extra 2 inches to, compensate for this expanding when you put it on the cake. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. So what I did was, say this was my pattern, okay? It's on a regular piece of paper. I cut it down the middle, and then I just, tape them together side by side using the measurements of my cake. So what I did first, though, is I put down a large piece of parchment paper, taped it on my counter. This is just going to save me some extra cleanup when I'm done. This will catch the excess buttercream when I spread it on my template. Next, I'm going to just tape my pattern down like that. And then you want to take another piece of parchment paper that is going to be the same height as your pattern or your cake. But again, you want to give it some extra space on the length, because this is going to be covered in buttercream. Eventually, we're going to have to pick this up and apply it to the cake. So you want to give yourself some grab room, so your fingers don't have to, get into the buttercream. Okay, so I'm now going to tape that down. Oops. There we go. Okay. So to do the piping, we're going to be using a thin consistency. You can do borderline thin medium, but I think that it'll come out smoother if you go a little bit thinner. So what I did was I prepared a couple of bags already. These are the colors that I chose, and I noticed on camera my burgundy doesn't look that pretty on camera, but in person, I swear it looks really nice. And I actually went with these colors because I found these Wilton sprinkles, Valentine sprinkles, at Target, and I love the mix. So that's why I went with these colors. All right. So what I'm going to do first is, I don't even have a tip in the bag. I just snipped off the end. So it's about the size of a tip 2. And I'm just going to start tracing all of my dark lines. You want to try when you're piping this to kind of keep the same thickness as you're piping. And for this particular design, you don't even have to hit all of the little animal prints. That's the beauty of this design. So I'll just kind of go through this quickly. And I find it's easier if you do, all one color. So again, for the pattern that I used for the class, that has a little more detail in it. You'll see that. So for a design like this, I would start on the inside of the flowers and work your way out. But this is kind of so simple, it really doesn't matter which one you're using first. when you're teaching the class, you might want to find a design and include that for your students with their supply list. So everyone is kind of working on the same design. That way you can better customize their supply list. They'll know what colors they need and that sort of thing. And I'd probably start out with a simple design like this. And this doesn't have to be perfect, especially for a design like this. You can see I'm putting this on pretty quick here. It's more of just a guide. I mean, there are other designs. If they're more detailed, you're going to have to, spend a little more time typing over them. But this one is abstract enough that, you can do just about anything and it'll still look good. All right, that's enough. I think you get the idea. Now I'm going to go back and add the other color inside. And again, a thin to medium consistency works well. For those of you that may have done this before, if you find something different works well for you, please share your expertise with us. All right, so there we go. So the next step is to go ahead and pop this in the refrigerator. You're going to want it to chill. It really depends on a couple of things. One, I found that if you're using a buttercream that has butter in it, it's going to chill a little bit faster than if you're using a buttercream that's straight shortening. So that's something else you might want to keep in mind when you're creating your supply list for your students. You might want to provide a recipe that uses at least half butter. I found with this particular design, all I had to do, as long as I've got butter in the recipe, is pop it in the refrigerator for like 10 minutes. The reason we need to chill it is because we want it to firm up a little bit before we add our coating over it, because we're going to have to spread a spatula over this. So if this firms up a little bit, there's less chance of it smearing. Okay, so this, you'll just have to excuse me for a moment. I'm going to put this in the fridge, but I have another one that's been chilling in the fridge that's already at this point. So we'll be able to continue on. Just one moment. Okay, so here's the one that has been chilling in the refrigerator. I'm going to remove this pattern so hopefully you can see a little bit better. So the next step is we want to add our background icing. So basically I'm taking the color that I've iced my cake with, which in this case is just white, and I'm going to just start filling in the background space in a zigzag motion. Okay, can you guys see
and
that?
Tiffany, yeah, I was going to say either move it or if you can raise your camera again, just so we can see a larger area.
So this is what you would normally do. However, what I found with this particular design that has so much like background empty space, this step isn't really necessary, but you should do it with a design like this, where there's a lot going on and there's not a lot of empty space, okay? So you would continue to do this fill-in, doing the zigzag motion until your whole pattern is covered. But for this design, what I have discovered is I can just take a big bag with tip 789 and just go right over the top of this. What I would do with my other design, once I've done this zigzag, you would still need to go over the top of the entire design. Can you see that? Just kind of loosely like this. And then you would take a spatula and spread over it. But all I need to do with this design is go over it with this bag. Just have your tip so the little teeth are facing up. Or no, I'm sorry, facing down. Wait, facing up, because when we put this against the cake, the smooth side is going to show. Okay? So I'm just going to put this right over the top, and this is where this piece of paper on your counter is going to come in handy. Okay, now I'm just going to take a spatula and smooth this over. Just going to clean off my spatula here. And you need to make sure that the whole pattern is covered, and you want to try to get it level. So using the 789, it applies the buttercream pretty thick, and that's why you can kind of skip that step of applying it with the small bag. That's more for when you have a lot of nooks and crannies that you need to get the icing into. But for this design, this is just as easy.
And Tiffany, what's the consistency of your background icing?
It's thin. All right, so that looks pretty good. I think I'm just going to add a little more to this side to even it out a little bit better. Okay. Oops. All right. Now this is where you would normally take your cake out of the refrigerator. And one thing I should have probably mentioned earlier, in a lot of our classes, when we put parchment paper on a supply list, you can usually substitute with wax paper, right? This is one time when you're not really going to want to substitute with wax paper to do this technique, because this icing is pretty heavy on the parchment paper. We need to lift this up to apply it to the cake. And the weight of the buttercream is probably going to be too much for a piece of wax paper. So that's another thing when you're making your supply list for your students. Definitely tell them that it has to be parchment paper. You could even use like acetate too. That's going to be a little bit stronger. All right, so I'm going to move this. Bring my cake over. Okay. Now I'm just grabbing the ends and I'm lining up the bottom, actually. And then we're just going to wrap this on the cake. Okay, I don't know if you can see. So right here, it is a little wrinkled.
Tiffany, move it back.
Move it back.
Yeah.
Is that better? So right
Yes.
here in this section, it's a little bit wrinkled. What I would normally do is chill this for about 20 minutes or so. You don't want to go too long because it still needs to be bendable. But that would probably help prevent this right here. But again, for timing today, we're kind of limited. So I do have a little excess. I'm just going to trim this off. And now we're going to use the smoother to smooth this on. And this is going to help not only adhere it to the cake, but it's also going to get rid of any lines from when we were piping. And you could press pretty firm. And again, that's where it helps to have your cake chilled.
Okay, and can you move that back into the center? There you go. Thank you.
All right, I think. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to put it in the refrigerator for about 10 minutes. Actually, I think I'll try the freezer. Maybe we can knock a couple minutes off. So bear with me 1 second while I put that in the freezer. Okay, so this is the point where if you guys have any questions or suggestions, we can talk about that now while the cake is firming up a little bit more.
So just to let you know, we're still having, some people are having trouble seeing the work surface, even though they're choosing speaker view. But just want to let everybody know that the recording should show what I'm seeing. And so you'll get a good view of what she's doing. We plan to post the recording probably within the next couple days, definitely by Monday. It's been a while since I've posted a video to the site, so I may have to go back and do a little relearning on that.
One thing I wanted to mention for those of you that are maybe teaching virtual classes or thinking about it, this would be a great class to do virtually, because I know for some of you where you would normally teach, you don't have a refrigerator where everyone can put their cakes or their patterns in to chill. In this way, if you're doing a virtual class, everyone, can be in their kitchen using their own refrigerator. Something else I want to mention is, and it didn't dawn on me till I did this technique for the first time. Those of you that have a side-by-side refrigerator freezer, you have to keep in mind that when you put your pattern, once you pipe the design on, you have to keep that flat when you put it in your refrigerator, and the side-by-sides have a much shorter shelf. So you might have to scale down your design. One thing you could do is maybe kind of chunk it into like quarters and do like 4 panels. And that's where you might have to pick a different design too, so it looks good being done in sections. And you would kind of just piece it together, when you go to apply it to the cake, if that makes sense. So those of you with the French door refrigerator, you should be fine as long as you're not trying to do this technique on like a 14-inch cake, because again, 14 inches is going to end up being more like 18 inches by the time you add that extra length to your parchment that you need to apply to the cake.
We have a question in the chat. How long do you leave the cake in the fridge to firm it up?
For this step right now, ideally I would probably do about 20 minutes. It really depends again on what kind of icing you're using. If there's butter in it, it's gonna chill a little bit quicker. I've got mine in the freezer and we're almost at 5 minutes, so we'll just give it another minute or two and see how that works. If it doesn't work, we know that we should probably leave it in a little bit longer. It's really gonna depend.
Okay.
Any other questions in the chat?
No.
No?
No. Do you want to just go over again where you found your patterns?
Yeah, so all I did for the animal print that I used, I just Googled animal print patterns and literally hundreds of images come up. And then I just found one that was kind of simple, clicked on it, and that's where it took me to the Hobby Lobby site. So, you know, those of you that frequent the craft stores, head over to the scrapbook paper aisle and you'll find lots of options there. Wrapping paper is great. Fabric too. Basically anything that has a pattern on it that you can lay a piece of paper over, that can work. Those of you that are talented enough to draw freehand and you're more comfortable drawing freehand on a flat surface than going directly on the side of the cake, go ahead and sketch out your pattern on your flat surface and then use that. If you're not really comfortable doing something freehand, you could always use like cookie cutters, do like a blossom cutter and trace several of them and create your own pattern on your parchment paper. So there's really a lot of different options. All right, I'm going to pull the cake out and we'll see what happens. All right, I probably could have chilled it a little bit longer, but we're gonna give this a try. I'm just trying to get the best view here. So basically all I'm gonna do is take a corner of the parchment and start peeling it off.
All right, hang on, Tiffany. Let me find your work surface again. Oops. There it is.
Okay. So we definitely could have left this in a little bit longer. I'm going to try to change the angle so you can see the side better. So I don't know how well you can see this, but it's not totally smooth. And so the reason that happened is because it didn't chill long enough in the freezer or fridge. So when I pulled the parchment off, it kind of lifted the icing a little bit. So this is where it would be better to keep it in the refrigerator or freezer a little bit longer. And then where this came together at the seam, we're just going to try to clean that up a little bit. And this is where it helps too when you're choosing a design, that you choose one that has a little bit of space where it's going to be easy to clean up a seam and you're not ending where another object or shape started. You want your seam to kind of be clean. So keep that in mind when you're looking for an image. All right, so over here it looks a little bit better, but again, we should have left this in the fridge a little bit longer. So what we would do next is go over the top edge. Guys, there we go. To just scrape off any excess. You want to make this nice and level. Okay. And then if there are any parts that you can touch up a little bit, you can just take a small spatula and smooth
Tiffany,
those
can you move
out.
it towards you a little bit? There you go.
So you could, kind of smooth it out where it needs to be smooth. And again, it would normally come out a lot smoother than this had we let it chill a little bit longer. And then from here, I would just put a nice big border on the top. Like, I've got my 1M bag here that I can add a border on the top and then use those fun little sprinkles. And that's kind of the condensed version of this pattern. So for those of you that joined a little bit late, one of the things that helps is if your students are using butter in their buttercream recipe, it'll help chill your pattern a little bit quicker. So that means less waiting time. When you're teaching the class during that chill time, that's when you can kind of teach them some border techniques. Talk about where they can find patterns, talk about your next class schedule, things like that. All right, and now for these adorable sprinkles. I don't know if you guys are able to see, but there's little arrows that are gold.
Can you scoot it over just a little bit, Tiffany? We're seeing, there you go. Thank you.
Okay, and there you have it. I don't know how well you can see the size there. Okay.
Very
Any
nice.
other questions? No?
Nothing coming through.
Betsy, do you have a question?
No, I don't know if it would work since you've done the design, but what I would let my students do if they had iced, the sides of the cake, to let it, sit and crust over a little bit. And then go back and take wax paper and kind of dust it very thin, super thin, with confection sugar. And then we would slowly put it on the sides of the cake so that you could mold it down and get it a little more, smoother, and use an icing smoother on it.
Yeah, like this too, once I could probably chill it again, or let it crust over, and then you could take a spatula and just smooth those areas that kind of lifted when I pulled the parchment off too soon. But yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Has anyone else tried this technique before? No?
I've tried it just on a flat surface, but not doing it around the sides.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely different doing it around the sides. And another thing that I would suggest, I found, like today I forgot to take my cake off the turntable. I find that when I start to wrap the design around the cake, if you take it off your turntable, it makes it a little easier, because when you go to wrap it, it starts pushing the turntable, making it a little more challenging to get it to apply to the cake properly. So that's another tip that I learned the hard way, and I forgot to mention it earlier, and actually take mine off the turntable.
And someone also mentioned putting a little piece of shelf liner on top between the turntable and the cake to keep it from sliding on the turntable.
Yes.
As well.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So any other questions? All right. Well, I hope that you found that this is a lot easier than it looks on paper if you printed out the guidelines and maybe were a little intimidated by it. It is pretty easy. I would just do a dry run, before you have to teach the class. And again, remember to use that buttercream, use butter in your buttercream recipe. Make sure you're just giving it enough chill time. And that's pretty much it. Oh, and make sure that you're measuring the width of your refrigerator to make sure that you haven't, you've got to scale down your pattern to be able to fit in your refrigerator so it can lay flat to firm up. Okay. Someone had mentioned something about acetate. Yeah, acetate is a good option too. If you can get your hands on that, that's really ideal to do your pattern piping on, because it's going to be a little sturdier than the parchment. And for anyone that joined us late, I would not recommend doing this on wax paper. I know in a lot of classes we interchange piping or wax paper and parchment paper. This is one time you don't want to use wax paper. It's just not strong enough to hold the weight of the buttercream when you have to lift the sheet up and put it around the cake. Okay. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this today and that you will tune in for Catherine's airbrush demo next month. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Tiffany. And I want to thank everybody who showed up today. Hopefully you learned something. If you give this a try, be sure and post pictures in the comment section for the buttercream, wrapped buttercream transfer cake on the website. And again, just a reminder that our next hour of sharing will be with Catherine O'Donnell on Saturday, February 20th at noon Central Time. I'll send out the Zoom link in the February 15th update, so keep an eye out for that. And that's our demo for today. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.